for this year. We've been given, sorry, we've been giving tutorials every year, and every year we have to update them because things in the world of AI are changing very rapidly. This year, we've taken the opportunity to include some really quite talented designers that we hadn't included. We've already got some very talented designers that we've been using over the past. And we've got a very action-packed program that will be taking place over 6 weeks. Today's session, we are delighted to have Joshua Vermillion back again. Joshua has been a mainstay of our tutorials over the years. He is a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and has a cult following, it would seem, on Instagram. David Alf has also appeared before. I've used many of his images in my book. Because it's such a clear manifestation of what you can do with AI. Very, in some ways down to earth, but always very imaginative. Mitra is new to the team, and she's part of the Digital Futures team. She's operating out of Dubai. She has a PhD from Cyprus, and she's just started teaching at Heriot University in Dubai itself. And finally, Bal Balaji, someone whose work I have admired from afar over the years, very powerful work, originally from Sept in India, now has been working for a number of practices in Europe and now presently in London. So it's a very powerful lineup of tutorials, of tutors, and we're going to take you from step one, basically from the very beginning of the whole story through to as over the weeks as it gets developed more and more complex. I withhold the list of names that we're going to include because there are some spectacular names in this series, and simply say that we move from progressively getting more and more hard until we get to the AI to video. Then we have some special sessions on new AI design practices, and finally some tutorials on particular office tools. And also tomorrow we will be following this up with a more general introduction. This What is AI really serves two purposes. It's both an introduction alongside a theoretical introduction alongside these tutorials, but also it initiates a series of Sunday sessions, deeply theoretical sessions, looking at the question of AI, superintelligence, and much more. We have also got some very prominent names lined up for that particular series. But I want to start today just by outlining and giving you a sense of the background of how images came to be generated using AI in the very beginning, and what they've led to. I'm going to start then with this particular individual, Geoffrey Hinton. This time last year, he was just Geoffrey Hinton. He is now Geoffrey Hinton, a Nobel laureate, one of the first two Nobel laureates in the world of AI, along with Demis Hassabis. And Geoffrey Hinton is famous for a number of things, but I want to point out one particular thing that he's famous for. In fact, two particular things. Firstly, he is the person who really gave us deep learning. He had a whole team working for him at the University of Toronto, and they are the kind of the godfathers in many ways of AI itself, of deep learning AI. And he's also responsible for initiating the whole question about how we start to generate images. And it started off initially with how do we recognize an image in the first place? And Fei Li, who's known as the godmother of AI, Geoffrey Hinton's known as the godfather, had a series of competitions, in ImageNet competitions, to see who could recognize images fastest. And Hinton turned up with the team that included Ilya Sutskever, now a very famous figure, one of the founders of OpenAI, and Surprising to many of them, they were using neural networks. Neural networks had been regarded as an obsolete technology, but they were using this technology, and even more surprising, they won this competition by a significant amount. And this really was the moment when people started to pay attention in the world of AI itself to neural networks. They recognized how powerful they could be. They won by a country mile. Fei Li, in her autobiography, I think exaggerates it somewhat, but she says it was such an astonishing moment. It was as though the world speed record for a car was beaten by 100 miles an hour by someone driving a Honda Civic. I don't think that's quite the case, but there we go. But certainly it took the world by storm. And but the holy grail for in the world of AI was to actually really not to recognize an image, but to generate an image. This was back in 2011, at a time when none of us had any of the kind of the facial recognition facilities on our phones and so on. It was really very primitive then, and we've come a long way since then. And they soon realized that if you reverse the process, if you went instead of from the image of the bird to the bird, you reversed it, you inverted the network, as it were, you would be able to produce uh, an image of some kind. And this was the birth of Deep Dream, very trippy images that created something of a sensation. And the first ever exhibition on AI generated art was curated by Blaise Guiriakos, um, based on Deep Dream. But it wasn't long before another development happened through a guy called Ian Goodfellow, who was doing a PhD like like Geoffrey Hinton, also in Canada, but in Montreal as opposed to Toronto. And he came up with the idea, reputedly, going out and for a drink with his mates in the pub one night, and he was bouncing around these ideas, and they got very excited, and he went back and basically wrote up this idea. And that idea is what we call GANs, generative adversarial networks, which really had a huge impact on how we can generate images. That involved basically two neural networks competing against one another, a generator here on the left-hand side and a discriminator on the right-hand side. And what happens was the generator would take random noise and produce an image which the discriminator would then judge against a training set. And if it was convinced about whether it was good enough or not, it would accept it. If not, it would reject it. And that in that process, it came to train the generator, to improve the generator. Think of it a bit like the way that a tutor might work with a student. The student produces work, the tutor rejects it, that's not good enough, that's not good enough, and eventually trains the student to produce better work. What that managed to achieve was something much, much more proficient in terms of images. These are images of I assume of trained on it. Oh, sorry. These are images that have been. This is a GAN that's been trained on images of Hollywood actors. Um, each one is going to be different, um, and it established a benchmark. At the same time, in architecture, almost nothing was happening. In 2019, I teamed up with Patrick Schumacher of Zaha Hadid Architects and Chargé Bouchen, and with Refik Anadol, who's now a rock star in the world of media art, and several others, including several other. There's a whole team of us, and we applied to curate the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. It was sponsored by Google. This was a dream team. And we got nowhere. 2019, nobody was thinking about AI. Anyway, Refik decided to get on with what we were proposing to do, which was to say to kind of to generate, to hallucinate. That was the term that we used in those days, to hallucinate an image of a building, not of a face, but of a building. So he trained his version of StyleGANs with thousands of images of the work of Zaha Hadid Architects, and eventually out of that we got what is effectively the first ever image of a kind of, let's say, architectural design to be produced by a GAN, and that was this one. I put that on the front cover of my book, which was the first in English on AI and architecture. It came out in December of 2021 and was followed by a slew of other books that also started looking at the question of AI and architecture. Just recently, I produced a second edition because that first edition was hopelessly out of date within a few months. What happened was, of course, things began to change in the world very rapidly. We had a new technique. Meanwhile, others were experimenting with more advanced versions of GANs. This is an example of cycle GANs, the work of Kopp Milblau. Daniel Bolajan was leading this particular research. And they took again, the work of the office of Kopp Himmelblau and paired it off against geological formations. And you started getting something that was really quite novel and quite different, extrapolating. So it wasn't necessarily just drawing from a finite data set, but it was, as it were, breeding these off against another data set. And something novel appeared. This was what we put on this, on what was, I think, the third or fourth book that came out a few months later, an AD called machine hallucinations. The term hallucinations has taken a slightly negative spin now, and we probably wouldn't use it anymore. But this was in a group of several books that came out in the following 6 months. What was in some sense tragic about them was that they all out of date once this had been announced. This is a very different system. This is what we all use today, a diffusion model. It works in a very different way to a GAN, and it's based on text to images. You write a prompt and you become a prompt engineer, as it were, and you use a massive pre-trained generic neural network, and it produces an image much, much quicker, much more easy, and so on and so on. It created a revolution. I was talking about these things at a lecture at the Architectural Association in May of 2022 and said, when are architects going to wake up to this? And there was a voice in the audience, and it was Patrick Schumacher, who said, we already have, and unbeknown to me, in fact, anyone else at the time outside of the office, he'd been collaborating with Refik Anadol. Refik had been given access to DALI 2 that hadn't been released yet. And what we saw then was a series of images significantly better than anything that could have been produced before. So Anadol was responsible both for the first GAN generated image and also for the first diffusion model generated image. And of course, we can all now produce these images. It's become mainstream, not DALI 2, but Midjourney. Midjourney seems to have become the platform of choice for many designers. And the quality has gone up as indeed the different versions have been introduced, and we're now in a very different situation to what we used to be in. So anyway, so today's session is going to be looking at these tools and taking you step by step through how you use them. We will have a series of presentations, and then we will have some time for some questions afterwards. So if you do have any questions, then please put those questions into the chat on YouTube. And I'm going to hand over now to Joshua Vermillion, who is going to take you through on a very easy step-by-step basis how to get started, the very, very basics, but incredibly useful. So welcome, Joshua.
Right. Thanks, Neil. Good morning, everyone. Let me just share. Continue to share. All right. All right, thanks for that introduction. It's always fascinating to sort of again hear where we've been. And so anyway, I'm just going to start talking a little bit about Midjourney and the basics here. And so quickly. Okay, here we go. So if you're new to us, if you go to midjourney.com, you can set up your own account. That's the web address. But basically the interface looks just like this. And what you'll notice is that First of all, there's a bunch of lovely images and videos, but there's a menu on the left, and then there's a set of tools along the top. So we'll just drill through the various menus and talk, I think, in a general way about how you can use Midjourney right out of the box here. Let's see. There we go. So the first one, create. So we'll talk a little bit about writing those prompts. What's really interesting about these tools is that rather than having to write code or know where all the menus and buttons are, you can simply use natural language, describe what you want an image of, and then these things sort of diffuse. So here's an example of that, right? The text prompt for this image on the right was a complex 3D spiky parametric cluster made from gradient colored pink and orange chopsticks in a concrete modernist living room with tall ceiling, extreme detail, long exposure photography, and volumetric light rays. So I'm trying to be descriptive here, specifying materials, colors, the atmospherics, the scale, the any sort of geometry that I'm really looking for, and then Midjourney sort of does the rest. Oftentimes, then you'll also see that there are parameters at the end of a prompt. And so with these parameters, we can do things like change the aspect ratio. I think by default, the aspect ratio is 1:1, basically a square. In this case, I've changed the aspect ratio for the output image to a 3:4, 3 parts wide, 4 parts tall. So it's more portrait oriented. I can specify the model, and so --V and then a number like 7 means that I want to use the latest Midjourney model, version 7. Midjourney's been out for several years now, and of course they've had version 1s, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.1, 5.2, 6, 6.1, 7, etc. So you can always go back and try out the different flavors of Midjourney over the years. You can go back and look at all the sort of legacy versions or models from the past. And then this is a really important one, --no. And then I put afterwards people, right? That's called a negative prompt. You can say --no and then type in things you don't want to see in the image and just get a little more control over the outputs. So in this case, I put --no and then people, and I have no humans in this scene. They're not using furniture. They're not walking around or standing or anything. All right. So let's talk a little bit about how you use these prompts. In the Midjourney interface, we have a field at the top, and it asks you, what will you imagine? And that's where you can simply type out and describe what you'd like to see. And then besides just this text field, we can actually click over here on the right and bring up some settings. So this is where you can begin to set some of those parameters that we talked about at the just a minute ago. Things like aspect ratio and image size, the version of Midjourney, how stylized or how literal you want it to interpret your prompt. And then there's even a slider for variety. So do you want to see similar results, or do you want to see a sort of wider array of interpretations of your prompt, as an example? So what's really interesting, I'll just point this out, but mode, there's a toggle between standard and raw. So Midjourney is a little unique. It's not open source. It's sort of a walled garden, if you will. You pay for a subscription to it, but it does have its own sort of proprietary layer of aesthetics that it includes on the results, and that's standard mode. If you want to try to remove that Midjourney secret sauce, so to say, you can switch it over to raw, and you'll get something that's much more literal and probably more photorealistic, because it basically strips away the sort of Midjourney aesthetic. So again, you'll find these settings right at the right-hand side of this text field. And again, it's something you can sort of experiment with. These tools reinforce the idea of rapid iteration, right? You can simply start to run and re-roll, modify and try again your prompts and your ideas. And this is simply what it does, right? It starts with a seed of Gaussian noise and then denoises it into something that's recognizable. You usually get 4 options in a grid, and then you can choose to upscale, make larger edits and things like that we'll talk about here in just a moment. So, again, here's some examples of prompts. A mid-rise apartment building made from a dense matrix of timber in an urban city with people walking and lots of plants, dramatic sky and light rays. Over here, we can see 4 sort of standard results. and most of the ingredients are there, right? So I'm talking about the scale, mid-rise apartment building. Let's see, it's materials and maybe even the form. I say a dense matrix. So then suddenly it starts to sort of push and pull, and you start to see these sort of modules. It's in an urban city. There's people walking, plants, and of course it covered the whole thing with plants and trees and everything else. So let's try another one. Kind of a weird thing to write here, but an immersive pop-up fashion store made from inflated, translucent, polychromatic, tubular latex membranes in the shape of an elaborate knot, as one does. So it's kind of a weird thing to write, but you can see again, you can do some of the sort of more outlandish things or be very specific, oddly specific in this case, and get some results that actually interpret it into something that looks real and tangible. All right, so. That is to say, once you generate some images, you have a whole list of options, a sort of real diverse array of sort of things you can do with the images afterward. So you're not necessarily done generating images and editing them. But what you can see is when you click on an image and the web interface pops up and you have a series of settings down here in the bottom right-hand corner. And so there's vary, there's remix, zoom, and then there's more if you drill down and start to expand the menu out further. Vary is simply generating variations based off of that image. So you can say, I want very subtle, minimal changes, but just some slight variation to this image, or I want something that let's say called strong variations, where we start to use a similar aesthetic, but then it starts to generate more other results. Let me just talk a little bit about that. So here's an example of a weak variation. Over on the left-hand side, you can see the original image. On the right-hand side, you see 4 results from running variations of it. Each time, the overall composition of the image is largely the same, even if the details have changed. So we still have a sort of column that melts from the ceiling down into the floor on the right-hand side, right at the frame and out of the frame even. And then we have a series of columns in the background. And you can see that composition largely holds up from image to image when we do a weak variation, right? Now, the little details and patterns can change, but overall the composition remains the same. Whereas if we did a strong variation, again, we're using the same image on the left, and we have a similar aesthetic, and yet we have a sort of different set of spaces over here on the right-hand side. So there are some differences there, and again, it's a way for you to simply rapidly iterate and sort of looking at perhaps when divergent thinking is of most value. Right. So there was also an option for zoom. This is an example of let's say an image I generated in Midjourney on the left. On the right-hand side, I'll just hit it in a minute. It's a video, but it's what I simply serially zoomed out of the image on the left until I got a stack of about 10 images. I then did a zoom effect and stacked them in Adobe After Effects to create a sort of powers of 10 sort of style video. So now we're zooming into this original image from way out. And so this is another interesting way of sort of, sometimes maybe expanding the frame of your image. Let's say something isn't quite centered up correctly, or simply just sort of zooming out and world building in a way, right? You sort of have a scene and now you want to sort of see what's beyond the camera frame. Right about now, you can start to see, I think, the original image. Right. So that's what zoom does. You can simply, again, repeatedly sort of zoom out at a magnitude of 1.5 or even 2 times the original image. Another example of this is pan. So there was a really frustrating thing sometimes where you'd say, I want a building or a car, but then it wasn't actually centered in the frame, or maybe a part of it is cut off by the frame. And so now you can simply enlarge the frame, sort of outpainting, if you will, up, down, left, or right. Here's an example of an image. And then after outpainting to the left and the right, using that pan command in Midjourney. So simply extending the scene out up or down or left or right to again further sort of world build, if you will. Right. So We're back at the interface and we're still in the create mode on the menu. And you notice that we have the text field that we talked about. And over here on the right-hand side, we still have the settings. Over on the left-hand side of that text field, there's another set of options that you can drill into. It looks like a little image icon. And when you bring that up, then it starts to reveal other ways you can begin to prompt, or further ways you can begin to prompt Midjourney. You can use natural language. And you can also use images in a variety of ways. So we have something called image prompts. We have style references, and then we have the omni reference, right? And the folks who present after me will also be talking about these sometimes in more detail. But I just wanted to sort of start with the image prompts. There we are. So you can click that and then begin to upload or pick an image. Or more than one image, actually, to use as an image prompt. So here's an example of where you might use an image prompt. And this is an example I've done where I wrote in natural language for the text prompt, an immersive spatial installation made from blue glowing acrylic petals hanging from the ceiling of a tall gallery with volumetric lighting. And what's interesting is it really latches on to certain words. So it saw the word petals and immediately assumed flower petals. So I got something that looked like flower petals. I wanted to be a little less. I didn't want to be that obvious or that So I didn't want to reference flower petals. I was thinking in a much more generic way, petals. And so that's an opportunity then to maybe feed it maybe some example images of what I was thinking. This is an old photograph of an old spatial installation. I used to make these things like 15 to 20 years ago with students. So here's an example of giving it a photo along with the text the text prompt. So photo prompt, image prompt, and the text prompt together. And then we can start to gain a little more control over the results when it comes to the geometry, the coloration, and the lighting. Right? So you can see that there's a substantial difference there. It's now starting to get a sense of what I was actually looking for geometry-wise. Right. So style reference is another way of basically doing a kind of a style transfer in a way. You can again feed it an image, and then it'll start to pick up the color scheme, maybe the composition, any other sort of aesthetic from that style reference, and apply it to the results. I do want to talk a little more about the omni reference. I think this is interesting. First of all, it used to be called character reference, and it was basically you could give it an image of a character, and then it would put the character's likeness into the results of anything you prompted. And I think they discovered finally that if you didn't have, like, let's say, a human or a humanoid sort of character in your scene, it would pick up on objects or even architecture in your scene and then actually place it into the results. And so they call it more of an omni reference now. So a person or an object. So here's an example, and this is just generated quickly in Midjourney. I said, just generates an alien from Star Wars, and then I fed that in as an omni reference to then create space, and then you can see that the alien is in this actually exploring. So that's one way you can begin to achieve some consistency or some coherence between running different prompts. So now, again, I mentioned that it works not just with characters or recognizable humanoids. Here's an where I fed it. This image is an omni reference. I think it's quite clear because of the contrast that the subject is this sort of aggregation of these sort of strands of it's some sort of hanging installation work in a dark space. And so I fed that as an omni reference. I think it quite easily picked out the bright, glowing sort of installation in the middle, and now it's replacing it in different scenes, right? Fairly faithfully here. It's reproduction each time. You can see again that some of the details are a little different, but mostly all the main parts are there, right? So I could place that in a well-lit lobby or in an urban plaza, etc. Using that omni reference. Right. So typically I would use Midjourney, not through the web app like I was just showing, but through a service called Discord. But a lot of these newer tools aren't available in Discord, so that's why I'm showing the web app. And some of these tools are really helpful. If we go down further down that menu on the left, we have things called edit and retexture, right? Here's that edit button on the left. And when you go to the edit, you'll see that there's two tabs, edit and retexture here. So with edit, we can do things like in Paint, just like if we were using generative fill in Adobe Photoshop, right? So I fed it this image here with, again, a very dark background, and there's a human underneath this sort of hanging art object. And let's say I want to actually get rid of that human. I can use the eraser tool and erase that part of the image, and then ask it to paint that person out. So what I do is then enter, let's say, another text prompt. In this case, let's say it's a dark space, and I say dash dash no, right? Negative prompting again, and I say no people in the scene. It added the version 7 for me. That's perfectly fine with me. And then give me 4 options of the image, painting that person out, right? So that's a quick way of beginning to edit things similar to Photoshop, like I said. And of course, I could use the same image and do the opposite. Instead of just painting out people, maybe I want to paint in people. I could paint or erase part of this image and have it regenerate just the parts that I erase, and say, let's say, a crowd of people looking at an art installation, and suddenly I get a set of results where I get more people in the scene. So it's a way for you to get a little more control or fine-tune things after an image is generated. You can then begin to edit it further, layer things in, and even think in terms of collage or photo montage. In fact, all right. So here's an example of the retexture. It's basically you can give it an image, and then you can simply re-render it out. It's using some sort of flavor of depth control net. So it's going to trace edges. It's going to sort of try to read the depth of this image. This is a really lousy kind of screen capture of something that I just asked the student really quickly, like, hey, give me that screen capture so I can use it. And they obliged. But then you simply enter in, let's say, a steel and glass building, and then you can start to re-render it with actual materials and reflections and context, etc. Right? So and get a number of variations on it. So that's another way of sort of thinking about these tools. You can generate images. You can also just re-render existing images using that retexture tool. Again, it's control net, and so it'll try to remain faithful to all of the sort of composition that you give it, and yet then start to overlay that sort of Midjourney aesthetic and render things out with really nice textures and glows and reflections, right? So, all right. So if I think that's really interesting. So far, we just talked about Midjourney right out of the box, but you can sort of drill down further and sort of personalize things. And in fact, Midjourney, there are ways for Midjourney to sort of learn your own aesthetic preferences. And so you can then start to personalize the results. And so let's just talk a little bit about that. I'm going, again, still on this menu on the left. So the first one we'll talk about is personalize, and then in a second we'll move on to mood boards. But suffice to say, there's this really interesting relationship you can have with Midjourney. Midjourney releases a model, and they want to learn which results their users like better. And so oftentimes you can vote or rank results. They'll give you like sort of 2 images, and you say, I like this one better than I like the left one. Then another 2 images pop up, and you say, I like that left one. Another 2 images pop up, you say you like the right one. It helps them understand and fine-tune their model, but it also stores that information and then starts to learn your own personal preferences. You can turn that personalization on as a sort of global setting if you want. And then you start to get results that are maybe more custom tailored to your preference. So it does learn from your own personal preference, and then can start to let that inform the results it gives you, right? All right, so that's personalization, and you're simply helping Midjourney out by ranking results from their model, so that they can sort of see what they can aggregate that as a sort of an average from all their users. At the same time, individually, you can start to you have your own sort of personalization profile, right? Now, if you wanted to gain more control or have different sorts of personalization profiles, you can make your own, right? You can basically make up what's called a mood board. And essentially, you go to the mood board settings over here on the left, and it says, okay, upload some images. If you upload some with a lot of consistency, you will see that consistency in the results when you use this particular mood board. If you have a sort of diverse set of images uploaded to the mood boards, then you'll get sort of cast a wider net in the results. But so, for instance, this is one that I just started called Moody Aggregations. I fed it a series of images. They don't say it, and I don't know the details, but it's kind of like maybe sort of fine-tune training your own LoRa model that you can then apply a style to. You upload some images. And then you can say using the prompt up here in this button, and it'll give you a dash dash p parameter plus a code. And anytime you use that in your prompt at the end, then it'll apply this as a sort of style reference, but a set of images, this mood board, if you will. And so when I feed it a bunch of images like this, I'll get outputs like this, right? Okay, so I did want to talk about some of the newer tools. I mean, this is mostly about images, but Midjourney now lets you animate images that you generate. So this is an example of one, right? This is I was just using this with the edit option, and doesn't take very long actually to sort of say I want the camera to pan around this, or to zoom through it, or to zoom out, or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about that. Um, Again, I'm just back in the create mode. And when I see an image that I've created in Midjourney, I can click on it. And here's where I get all those options like variation and upscale, etc. But down here at the bottom, I have something called animate image. I've sort of highlighted that with red. And I can animate things with low motion or high motion. In other words, do I want more movement or less movement? And I can even sort of specify if I want it to loop so that the end point is the same as the start frame. And so, let's say I say hi animation and I want to animate this image. And within roughly 90 seconds later, I get 4 options for how to animate it. Right? I can pick from these. I can upscale them to HD resolution, or I can try again, or begin to change and remix the prompts. And so anyway, again, you see these as not necessarily all just end results, but as sort of seeds they can continue to sort of iterate and work through. Right. So you take something like this, and then suddenly you can animate it and walk through it, or add that dimension of time, which I think is an interesting option now. And there's always been tools that we could use that with, but Midjourney now can do it sort of natively in its own environment. Now, I will say, again, when you go to the create, and when we pull out that image prompt button, there is something called start frame. So you can actually specify a start and even an end frame and generate a video like that. And I'm just about to wrap up. These are the last two slides. So I can specify a start and ending frame for a video. So that's really helpful, particularly if you're thinking about using this with and starting to sort of more carefully and choreograph, like what do you want to see at the beginning and the end. And so I gave it something that 2 things that are completely different, just to see what would happen. And this is what it turned out to. So this thing starts to morph and kind of in weird ways. But again, you can sort of have fun and experiment with these tools now with the dimension of time as well. And I do genuinely hope this is helpful. This is my last slide, so I will just mention again, if you're interested or you have any more questions for me, you can find me on Instagram. Joshua Vermillion is my handle. And thank you. I'll just go ahead and turn it back over to Neil. Neil, you're muted still.
Sorry. Thank you, Joshua. I always learn something new from what you've got to say. It's and super clear. I can see why you've got a cult following. Anyway, let's move on to David Al. And David is also on the West Coast, extremely early for all of us on the West Coast. David, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm going to try to kind of pick up the torch from where Joshua left off. There's a slight bit of overlap, kind of looking at some of those tools, but a bit more in depth. Mine's going to mostly focus on kind of process, how I think about these things, and how I develop some of the images that I do. So anyways, I'm David Alf, and you might know me better as midjourney.architect. That's not a Midjourney account, that's me. So my focus is primarily on, architecture. It's what I do, and it's just kind of what I like to create. I use it as what I like to call an artificial sketchbook. I see this as a way of kind of working out your digital design muscle. There's times where you're working and you're just in CA, you're building the house, and it's not very creative. And so I've always seen something like Midjourney as being that outlet for me. While I like to hand draw, I've never been the best at it, and digital tools come quite easy for me. And so I see this as a way of kind of continuing that analog into the digital and kind of giving you a whole path to actually flex your brain in a way where you don't normally. So anyways, some of these decision making, aesthetic curation, visual synthesis, memory recall, effortless experimentation, nonlinear exploration, iterative refinement, pattern recognition, image revolution, and adaptive workflows are just some buzzwords, but essentially some things that kind of point to how I see this tool kind of flexing with me. On a baseline, Joshua kind of covered most of this. I'm going to focus on just a couple. Essentially, model is important, but generally you're on V6, or sorry, V7 is the current. Sometimes I'll go to V6 or V6.1 because it allows you to use multiple image prompts, image references. So that's kind of a nuance we'll touch on later. Style reference is a huge one. It's more flexible, especially now in V7. Personalization is also massive. It's maybe my favorite tool lately. Chaos is a fun one for design iterating. Joshua didn't really touch on this, but it's kind of adds an extra element. So what I often do is I try to apply tons of words and prompts and parameters to control the output, but then sometimes I still want to explore design and have the machine create some things that are outside of the general scope of what I'm looking for, and I can then kind of filter where I like and where I don't and follow those roads. So it's a way of kind of opening it up a little bit, even within your still aesthetic stylization. Stylize, I always keep it low, kind of to the same point about style raw. So I usually use style raw in a style that's really low. I find that the higher the style, just the more inauthentic and computer generated things feel. So anyways, I trend towards the realism. And seeds are important. I'm not really going to touch on them, but they can be another fascinating thing to even further hone in on certain things that you're studying. On versions, you can see the quick evolution of where it came from and where it is now. As I said, V7 and V6.1 are kind of where I trend. V6.1 if I want to have a little more impact with my image references. All these are taken with the same prompt up here and just kind of changing. Literally, the only change is the version. To quickly touch on process, I, like Joshua, also use Discord. One of the reasons why I like Discord is that it sets up channels for you. You can have servers and channels, so you can break down projects or even certain views that you're chasing. I'm usually not just chasing one view of a project. It's trying to get one design or project that has then multiple views or vignettes or different maybe it's an aerial or an interior shot, but it's all of the same project. One way to do that is to kind of have your folders and your channels broken out. But for one of them, if you're just to kind of start, so each color is representing essentially what one of those channels is, and then orange, the primary one here is just a quick example of how I see the process. I normally do almost a scatter shot of approach where I'll send a ton of prompts. I'll change little variations. I might change the image prompt. I might change weighting. I might change a couple words. The first round is really trying to look at just where are we in latent space? What looks good to me, and then start that curation process. Sometimes I end up taking a left turn if nothing's looking good too. I'll hone in on a few that I like. I might vary them. I guess I can zoom in here. So I might hone in and then click vary and further explore an iteration specifically. And then I will take some of those and upscale them and then kind of look at it as a set and curate it down. Then I'll take some of those and feed them into the next round. Maybe I'll add in some other images as well and kind of just take it a step further. Again, you're creating a ton, curating down, editing, creating a ton, curating down, editing. Kind of do that over and over again until you develop and refine exactly what you want. At the very end, of course, then once I'm getting to where I want to be, then you start getting into some of those other steps like pan, zoom, and a refined edit where you might be actually erasing or adding entourage in a certain area. In reality, like that's clean. In reality, the process feels more like this. It's chaotic. It's one reason why I use the channels, because if you just do it all in one stream on the web version, it can be difficult. So I'll do my heavy work here, and then when I'm ready to refine, maybe I'll then take it into the web browser and eventually animate or something. So personalization is huge for me. I use the global profile most of the time. And then I've also developed a whole set of different mood boards that do different things. And then we can also talk about how you can combo them. So here's a quick slide showing just the same prompt with really only changing personalization settings. Top left is your standard without anything. And then my global setting is the second image on the top. The global setting is created by you voting, and it's not always architecture, so it's kind of weird. Sometimes you're voting on, people or objects or things. It looks like a commercial or a sketch, and has nothing to do with what you're aiming for. But it's a general, what do I like and don't like? You can also like your own generations in Midjourney, and that will add to the catalog as well. So don't forget to do that. That's one. I don't usually use likes for me revisiting, but I do for voting essentially of what I like. And then I've developed a set of mood boards. Some of them are sketchy and artistic. Some of them are photorealistic. Some of them are my own photos. I take a lot of photos, architectural photos, and I've created my own mood board essentially. That's versions of my images, maybe like 300-400 images that I've uploaded that then create this data set that it trains on. And then what you can do is you can combo. So, you can kind of step through it. These are two photorealistics. This is an artistic one that's much more sketchy and loose, and then you start to combo them. And some of these actually have that artistic in there, so it's not too photorealistic. It kind of has a blend. Upsizing some of them just so you can see it a bit better. Again, on the left, it's standard, and then on the right, this is one of the photographic mood boards that I have. You'll see kind of a difference in the aesthetic, the subtlety. There's more contrast, certain view angles that you'll get in just your standard mode that are hard to break out of. And so that's one reason why I really like the personalization. All of these have a personalization applied to them. You can kind of see just the difference again with just this, with the same prompt. You could tune it, of course, to be, you know, a materiality type or a certain lighting type or something really specific. I generally don't go there because I like to mess with that in my prompt itself. But that's something that you can do. You can really create a mood board for just about anything if you want to. Image referencing is maybe my biggest thing that I've always used, and it has changed with V7. I used to use multiple image prompts all the time, but V7 doesn't let you. So I've kind of changed the way that I've developed. I'll still use V6.1 sometimes just to have that ability, and then you can always take a 6.1 and then use it as your one image prompt in V7. So you can kind of combo and develop in an early mode and then, you know, kind of upgrade it later if you want. So here is an example of the same prompt we've been looking at for all the other stuff and adding in an image that I took of the Sheets Goldstein house by John Lautner, just to kind of see, you know, what could it change? What will it do? Coloration, composition, design, everything. Quick test showing different image weights. So 0.2, your standard is 1, 0.2 is quite low, and then 2 is high. It goes up to 3. I can't say, I rarely do 3 because normally I want some variation in this, but it locks it in even further. And you can see as we progress how much closer it gets to that reference image and how much closer it is to the original on the left. If you switch it up, you know, it gives you something wildly different. So again, an image weight of 1, as you can see, just in my prompt, FYI, you know, style 50 and raw. But yeah, it gives you something that's much different than that original prompt. And sometimes you can see how it might go too far. Maybe the rocks, the cliffs in the background aren't quite as, you know, realistic to that setting that I want in Utah. It's kind of a tweener land, so you have to be careful. And again, that's why you can bump it down if that's overriding too much. This is a version of the same prompt, but you know, bumping that down again to kind of not have it override some of those other things that I was worried about. I'm also sprinkling in a little bit of chaos to get some added variation, and then I've now applied multiple personalization prompts. So you can start to see how to hone an image like that. Going with a different type of image, something more close up, and a different coloration, kind of a much more warmer sunrise look. It more closely matches the original image, so it's not necessarily trying to change the lighting, but just change the design and the architecture that it's creating. And as you can see, you get that board form concrete reading through immediately and a much different viewpoint. Same prompt, but with the personalization and lowering the image weight, and you can see how it can take something that feels a little maybe chunky or forced or just a little too rough and really allows it to smooth itself out and refines it a bit. Here's another version. You can, you know, ask it to do something more aerial, and I didn't even change the text prompt, but just changing the image will automatically change some of those settings for you. In this option, I'm starting to show that you can take your old prompts and feed them in. So if you start to find a pathway that you like, let's say in your early scattershot hit, you can see I found one that I liked, and okay, now that becomes your image prompt for then the next generations. So you can really chase a cohesive set in a way by using some of those tools to get some similar results. But in this, I'm still exploring, or also kind of looking at this as a test case for the presentation, but to kind of run it through a few iterations. Here you can see on the left is an image weight of 1, and then an image weight of 2, and then an image weight of 2 with a chaos of 30, and then an image weight of 2 with a chaos of 50. Now again, chaos is to add some extra to really change it up, let the computer essentially make up some different techniques. And I like to do that, but one way to kind of control it, you'd get something much more wild if I didn't have an image weight of 2. So if you had no image or a really low image weight, it would go absolutely crazy. But by controlling it with the image weight, you can still get some variation, but have it still in the same realm. Style references are important. I often pair both together. That's a typical. You can see in this first test, I'm looking at using a perforated panel as the base image, and then the Lautner image as the style reference, and this is the result. I did the same thing, but inverted, which one is the image and the style, so you can see the kind of direct translation. In this first image, it's really trying to actually use that perforated image as the base. You get an even, and then there's more of a filter of the green blue coloration and some of the, kind of detail that you see on the style reference, whereas when you invert it, you start to get the diagonal reading through of your composition, and then you get the materiality and the detail from the style reference as your screen overlay, which I found this one to be more, in line with what I was looking for. It actually has a really nice perforated steel aesthetic. This is then a version of the same applying personalization setting, and you can see how from that, some of my personalization tuning gives me this. So again, a lot of the same, but then with little tweaks, and you can start chasing down different avenues. Just to change the whole lighting and the overall aesthetic of the image, I wanted to use a much darker artificial light image from Paradero in Mexico, and you can see the result. It's pretty clearly bends towards what I was looking for. To kind of mess around going left field, using another image, a style reference being from the Webster, so really trying to pull pink concrete aesthetic. And you can see it even at layers in a foreground image to almost replicate that. Kind of mixing the styles, going perforated and pink, very clearly can get that. In this instance, I've also added a style weight of 200. So with the style reference, you can weight it. It starts at 100 and it goes up to 1,000. So you can play with the weight of your style reference. Unfortunately, with V7, you can't play with an image weight. So you're just stuck with that. But that's maybe they'll change that someday. It's something that I like to do a lot in V6. Is another version. And then you can layer in your style references. You can do multiple. So instead of just having one really control it, you can almost do a version of a mood board, but on a much more curated level where you're playing around with 4 or 8 or whatever images that you plug in. And then here's just a few kind of using that last set with multiple style references, some different sets that I created. I was changing them a little bit, trying to get different lighting scenes. So this is more of your morning or some of your, kind of haziness, then more of a dusk, moody, and then I guess whatever. This is more of your dusk, your blue hour. Again, trying to keep the same overall aesthetic and just mostly start to change some of your views and your lighting where you can start to really see how you could curate a set of images that feel like a cohesive project maybe throughout time. And then don't forget to upscale and maybe use another tool like Magnific or something else, which then can add even more resolution and help refine characters or plants or other elements that you might want some detail to. Just going to quickly touch on, close to there. I'm just going to quickly touch on multiple image references. So again, can't do that in V7. With V6, sky's the limit. You can add, I think I've done maybe 20. You can really push it. You can also add ::2, which is your image weight now of 2 for that one image. So I think of it as almost like a stew that you're cooking. You add a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's you're never sure exactly how it's going to come out to taste, and it's always adjusting the recipe kind of constantly. That's essentially that. So, this is the image that I chose to reference with 2. So you can see it's this 4 plus, again, still my standard relative prompt, kind of looking to see what that would get. And just to show you, this is the more simplified version with just using one image prompt and V7, and it still gives you, something great. But as you can see, it's a little more direct, and sometimes it's hard to fully take a left turn or completely combine things, which sometimes I'll still revert to V6.1 just for that. And again, you could take this image and then refeed it in if you wanted to in V7. So, you can kind of still chase that down. Here's another one, looking again with layering in the personalization, changing the style reference, seeing what that can give. You can still, you can see this one's jumping that V7 image that I just created and then now inserts that and kind of builds upon it. And then taking that style that I used, using that as the image and then layering in a bunch. And so I kind of go back and forth, flip around. Again, it's a real experimentation and scattershot until you kind of hone in on the set that you're really trying to curate. And this one added 6 style references. I guess my prompt isn't totally accurate up here. There's 6 in there. And most of these are using that set. Again, kind of another set of perforations, but this time in concrete. So yeah, those were all, mostly chasing relatively one viewpoint. Again, I'd have a whole other strand chasing different things, looking at an interior shot, looking at an aerial view, looking at a close-up view, and then each of those would come out with large sets. As you can see, I make a ton. I might end up with 200 images, 300 images, and then real magic is curating it down at the end. And that's one reason why I call this, flexing your digital design muscle, is that I think when you're making all of these choices and you're doing all of this curation, you're finding what you like, you're finding what works with you and your style. That's really where a lot of the design work is. And, having that, that ability to kind of make those calls and understand your decisions and why you're going where you're going, and maybe recalling previous things and how to kind of avoid a similar fate. I think that's really the important part of this process that helps me make new connections. So anyways, I will hand it off here. That's all she wrote.
Thank Thanks, David. That. I am now beginning to kind of question. Initially, it called this for beginners, but I mean, I think the level at which you guys take that is really kind of quite advanced. But listen, I mean, it lays it out for everyone else to see what you can do when you really push these systems. I just want to ask you one question, David. Just what's in my mind. How does this kind of work relate to what you do in the office? Is it a kind of foil where you bounce ideas around, or do you actually? I mean, do you actually push any of these ideas in the office in your actual architectural office work?
Yeah, we do. We fully explore and experiment with these tools. I think it still has a limited use to some extent. As control nets and more control come into play, I think that is more of where the industry is trending to take something that you've sketched or you've designed maybe by hand and then replicating that in a much more Midjourney aesthetic, right, is essentially the goal that we're trying to hit. And now Midjourney finally has that capability. Before you'd have to use Stable Diffusion, which we tinkered with, but it's so heavy. It has a high demand on your hardware. It's also really difficult technically to kind of operate and install. It's clunky, I find, and slow, and ultimately never produced anything quite as visually appealing as Midjourney. So I always trended towards Midjourney for those reasons. But now that Midjourney's getting those capabilities, I think it's much more applicable. But just as a reference, often as an office, we don't want to provide maybe a precedent image of another architect's work. Maybe we're presenting to a client, we're in early concept phase, and we want to show some ideas of what this could be, but maybe we don't have the perfect project. Well, now you can imagine one, and now you can imagine one in the style of our office, and now you can make a personalization or a data set based on our photography of our projects that now then feeds into kind of what we're creating as a precedent to then show a client. So it can be used really early on. You can use it to kind of vignette a space or an interior and kind of design in that mode. But it is tricky because ultimately we are architects and actually, want to have a true hand in what we're doing. But I think we find that it's kind of like why I like to sprinkle the chaos in. Sometimes you hone in so fast, so quickly on an idea that you lose sight of things, or you maybe don't want to spend time burning hours billing the client on something. And in this case, you can iterate really quickly, many, many options, and present that to the owner or principal in charge of a project and say, hey, I know we've been thinking about 3 schemes, but here's 20. What do you think? Are any of these interesting? And maybe there's one element of that that then weaves its way into the actual scheme that you're working on. So, um, that's maybe a long-winded answer to your question,
No,
but
that was fantastic. I never realized it was quite so integrated into your work. I mean, this image we see here, is that a potential project that's going on in the office, or is it just simply work on
no.
the side? No. Okay.
No, to be honest, all of the projects that I really post are my own doodles. I try to separate work and personal fairly clearly, but it bleeds between, of course, because I do use it at work. But most of my stuff are just doodles, and again, me kind of flexing my design muscle, and in a way, I'm using it as my sketchbook, so that when I am working on these projects and I have a house in a setting like this, I'm like, oh, okay, have we thought about this? Have we thought about a perforated concrete option? I'd probably toss that out at some point because it's now logged in my archives, and I'll kind of pull out old projects that I've doodled on, and show that sketch. So
And just briefly, another question, follow-up question. Do you tell the client you're using Midjourney for these projects, or how
yeah.
does it go? You do.
Yeah,
Okay.
we now have it baked into some of our language that, in our contract, that even some of our deliverables are, potentially generated. But we also, give them a disclaimer. And to be honest, a lot of times when we're using Sometimes when we're creating a vignette of a space, like an early concept, we'll intentionally fuzzy it. We'll apply Photoshop filters to make it feel less real and more sketchy, or I might apply the sketchy personalization to make it feel sketchy. So it's not pretending that this is real or it's a space or we're complete with the design. It's, it's fuzzy still. It's like actually playing to the computer generation part of it in a way. So
So
we
just
do a few of that.
so the client doesn't sort of say, well, you're using AI, so I'm not going to pay you so much. It's not kind of, or does it?
No.
Does okay.
Well, because I'll immediately challenge a client. Why don't you make this pretty picture that I've made? It's not as easy as you think. As you see with the layers of how deep I go and what I'm making, it's not straightforward. And it still truly takes an artist or an architect to fully make and curate this image set. So, yeah. And I'll also say that you can almost tell sometimes when a newer student is producing work because I think a part of what makes my images stand out somewhat is that I know what can be created. I know what's real. I know what structure. I know proportions. I understand what things should look like. I know what the lighting should look like for these, especially from my photography background too. And so my curation, I feel like, might have an edge on a younger student who isn't aware of all these things and hasn't worked for 20 years. So, if a client or somebody is thinking that this is easy, they'll have another thing coming because it won't quite feel right.
No, that's fascinating. Okay, that was fantastic, David. I love your work, and that's why I include that in my book. It's just like you do things I don't do, and it's very very you've made it into an art form of your own. It's fantastic work. Okay, that was great, David. Let's move on to Mitra. Mitra is working as an academic as opposed to in practice. And now in Dubai. Just started at Heriot University. I always find that quite difficult to imagine a university in Scotland operating in Dubai. It seems climatically very different. But welcome, Mitra.
Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you for having me today. Hello, everyone. And yeah, my name is Mitra Alamoradi. I'm currently an adjunct faculty at Heriot University, as Neil Leach mentioned. My background is architecture and with a PhD focus on spatial analysis and space syntax. Alongside academic, I also work in the field of AI and exploring how AI can inspire innovative approach. And I'm delighted to be here with Digital Futures to share my presentation with you. Thank you so much. Let me share my presentation now. Yeah. Okay. Is it shared now?
Yes.
So today I'm going to talk about biomimicry in the age of AI shaping the future of the fashion and architecture. This is an introduction about me that I've previously mentioned. So let's start with the presentation about the definition of the biomimicry and the role of AI in design. So biomimicry or biomimetic is the emulation of the models, systems, and elements of natures for purpose of solving human problems. And what is the role of AI in design? So AI can help designers to generate new ideas and optimize design process by analyzing data and natural process. The words of biomimicry design. Biomimicry comes from the Greek bias, or the meaning of the life, and mimesis or imitation. Biomimicry in architecture and nature-inspired design, natural principles and processes are applied to create more efficient and sustainable built environments. So in architecture, we must think about efficient and sustainability as well in the biomimicry architecture. So here we are going to talk about the biomimicry categories, which is the biomimicry design, the biomimicry biomorphic design, which is about the natural forms and imitating the shapes and patterns from nature in the design of buildings and products. For example, the wavy roof structure inspired by seashells, as you see in the pictures generated by Midjourney, and bioprocess design, which is inspiration from natural process, applying natural mechanism to architectural and product design. As an example, natural ventilation system based on termite cooling strategies, and self-cleaning surface models after lotus leaves, as you see in the picture. The other category is biomaterial design, which is inspiration from natural material using bio-based substances or mimicking the compositions of a structure of natural material. So as an example, we can mention about self-healing concrete inspired by bacteria, or waterproof coating modeled after, again, lettuce leaves. The biointegrated design, which is inspiration from ecosystem adaptation, design that harmonize with ecosystem and prioritize environmental sustainability. As an example, green architecture building integrated with natural surrounding. And the last one is biobehavioral design, which is inspiration from natural behaviors. So the mimicking the interactions and behaviors of living organism to optimize the design. As an example, applying the concept of swarm intelligence of the bees as a smart city. Here are the key features of biomimicry, which is sustainability, adaptability, resilience, optimization, and integration. The examples of biomimicry in architecture based on the categories which I mentioned before. Examples of could be biomimicry, biomorphic design, which is the Morpheus Hotel in Macau, inspired by bone structure and cellular growth, featuring a lightweight exoskeleton that reduce the needs of internal columns. Also, you can see the voids in the facade, which could be optimized light and airflow in the buildings. The other one is bioprocess design, which is the Mars Habitat by AI Factory company. So it's a self-sufficient habitat, but built with biodegradable, bio-based materials with and 3D printing using corn and sugarcane biopolymers. The third one is the Myco3 Singapore, which is a load-bearing structure made of mycelium, which is a kind of fungi roots, and showcasing the potential of biodegradable and regenerative construction materials. The next one is biointegrated design. Bosco Vertical Milan, which is vertical forest towers that filter city air, reduce heat, and provide habitats for urban wildlife through integrated vegetation. And the other one is biobehavioral design. Al-Bahar Towers in UAE, dynamic facade inspired by desert flower, reducing solar gain, and through adaptive shading, enhancing energy efficiency. Biomimicry in fashion design. Biomimicry in fashion means drawing inspiration from natural forms, process, and materials to design innovative and sustainable and functional clothing. As the architectural process and categories, I would like to introduce the biomimicry categories in fashion design as well, which is biomorphic design. As an example, Iris Van Herpes, the hypnosis collections inspired by the fluid movements of water, ocean waves. As you see in the picture, it is just continuing and using the forms of the movements of water and organic patterns using the 3D printer. Usually this designer used the 3D printer and also laser cut. So she creates futuristic garments that reflect the rhythm of nature. The other one is BioLace by Carol Catlett, that uses genetically engineered bacteria and fungi to produce self-growing lace-like textiles. It imagines a future where clothing grows like a living organism. And the other one is biomaterial, like mallow mushroom leather. This one is also very interesting, that is sustainable alternative to animal leather made from mycelium fungi roots. It's soft, durable, and also fully biodegradable. And also biointegrated design, living seawall dress by Charlotte McCurdy and Philip Leem, created from algae-based bioplastic inspired by ocean and ecosystem ability to absorb the carbon. And biobehavioral design, bioskin by MIT, a fabric with living microbial cells opening tiny vents similar to plant stomata, enabling natural body cooling. So how AI enhanced biomimicry in architecture and fashion design? AI is transforming biomimicry in architecture and fashion, enabling designers to analyze natural patterns, structure, and system with greater precision. So as a category again, about the data collections and analysis with AI, we can mention about the biological data gathering, analysis, and optimization and architectural modeling. The biological data gathering could be AI that extracts the data on natural forms, ecosystem behaviors, and materials using sensors, image processing, and biological data sets. And the other one is analysis and optimization by machine learning, and analyzes this data and adapts it for architecture and fashion applications. And also AI algorithm evaluate the design's material and environmental condition to generate a predictive and optimized model. Each of them could have different examples. For example, for the first one, we can mention about using the drones and AI mapping for considering the termite cooling ventilation. And the second one could be AI optimization by building facade for energy efficiency based on the leaf photosynthesis by machine learning. And the other one, generative design like Autodesk Dreamcatcher, creating bone-like lightweight structures. And the other one is AI-generated biomorphic design AI tools. I usually use the Midjourney for the designs, which I'm going to share them with you in the following slides. So AI tools generate biomorphic designs inspired by natural forms and systems, enabling architects to generate complex and efficient and sustainable design. The first one could be Midjourney, DALL-E, AI-generated conceptual design, Autodesk Dreamcatcher, generative AI for architectural solution, and Grasshopper Rhino 3D for parametric bio-inspired modeling. Also, for different kind of purposes, we can use the different tools for AI generative designs. Even we can use them architecture, maquettes, or different tools for producing or generating the plans or any other parts of the architectural stage. But usually we use the Midjourney for generating the picture, the image of the pictures. So the other one is about the AI analyzes natural compounds like spider, mycelium, and biopolymers to develop and optimize biomaterial. So this could be some examples for these three stages, which could be Biologic MIT Media Lab as a moisture-activated fabric designed with AI, and AI 3D printer, sustainable material and complex structure, and computational fluid dynamics, CFD, simulating material performances in natural conditions. So these are a kind of introductions and stages for, first of all, the categories of the biomimicry design and how we can use the AI for biomimicry designs in architecture and fashion design. The simulations performances could be again about the AI digital twins as a virtual testing of the architecture under the real conditions, which could be also a kind of tools to predict the and visual testing. The other one could be Grasshopper, which is very common between the architects and the architectural students. And by integrating with AI, we can produce the parametric biomimetic design and generative AI in CFD analysis. So these are some of the design. I'm not going to share or explain about the Midjourneys and this way of producing the biomimicry design in Midjourney, but I'm going to mention about how as an architect we can think differently as an also biomimicry or biomorphic designer to produce natural nature inspired designs. So these are some of my designs which I use or inspired by any natural creatures such as bacteria, microorganism, or physalis leaves, spotted eagle, ray, green lacewing, bugs, jellyfish, marine organism, other elegant natural forms, or any other insect, even ocean creatures like nudibranch. I think those who use the Midjourney are very familiar with this kind of insects, especially those who work with biomorphic or biomimicry design. For example, mandarin fish, lionfish, Picasso bug, or orchid mantis, cuckoo wasp, green milkweed locust, red speckled or jewel beetles. So these are some of the insects or creatures which I specifically used in my prompts to produce these kind of images. Also in fashion design, as you see, for example, in this designs and the previous one, sorry, the next one, I lost the picture. So as you see here is the kind of eagle ray, spotted eagle ray fish that is spotted one that I used it in fashion design and also architectural design. And also bacteria, mushrooms. These are some of the published design works in different kind of magazine. As a conclusion, we can reach to this point that biomimicry empowered by AI bridge the nature and design transforming architecture and fashion into sustainable and innovative design. So by learning from natural systems, designers shape solutions that are efficient, resilient, and environmental responsible. So in our architectural designs, we can consider those categories of biomimicry categories, and also processes, behavioral forms, or any other ecosystem. Also by using the AI, we can have a better, sustainable, and innovative systems. These are just generative designs by Midjourney, but with different kind of tools that I've previously mentioned, we can reach to this kind of designs and sustainable and innovative systems. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mitra. And now, last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Bal, whose work I have admired from afar. And I would say that what's interesting is that I think we saw certainly in some of the work I think that David Alf and Joshua were presenting, it is not so straightforward to produce this work, and this is a kind of introductory session, but I think we're setting the standard quite high. So anyway, Bal, great to meet you online at last, and hopefully we'll catch up in London at some point for a beer or something. But welcome.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Mitra, for the invitation and some great presentations. So let me just make sure that we can see the presentation full screen. Yes. Are we there? Yep. Can you see the screen? Yes.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Thank you. So first of all, I'm probably here to some extent take away some of the mysteries of how we can get AI to work for you. And number one, I'm not an architect. I studied architecture. I was an early CAD guy at Calatrava's, and I left immediately after that. And for the past 3 decades, I've been a software engineer and entrepreneur in telecoms and also in digital imaging, and most recently in data and analytics. And currently, I'm founder and of a company that is building a so-called multimodal AI desktop, which essentially will be able to do everything from create legal contracts to, of course, creating images like Midjourney, and also 3D and so on and so forth. But that's the important. The important is the context with AI. And architecture is great because I'm essentially, I'm very closely tied to architecture, and it's different from, just the prompting that we otherwise do for everything else. So here, within the context of the Insta, I'm putting myself in the role of an architect who's using AI to create as a creative companion. And when I say that, it's something that I want to be, or I pretend that I would be using in my daily work. I'm not doing what I call as flying pigs, which are, visualization, which is, fantastic. But maybe I cannot use that in my daily work, as even though it might be visually stunning. And I'm not interested so much in the utility aspect, which I think David's presentation in particular was, did touch on the utility aspect and some of the challenges of using it in your practice. So I'm not really having those constraints. But at the same time, I will come back to that role that I play in the Insta work. So a couple of notes on the Insta page. I've spent the last 700 days, at least 5 to 10 minutes a day, sometimes a bit longer on weekends doing this. So I create a couple of images every day. And the first tip is whatever you do, irrespective of whether it's AI or not, you do need to spend the time in order to, make that tool yours. I focus on Midjourney, despite the fact I'm hugely technical. So because that's what I think that normal users do, and where they have an immediate result, as well as all of that tuning that both Joshua and David touched upon. It's very image first. It's about, this is the context of social media, so you have to attract attention. There is no specific architecture direction. This is important to my own work, and I will come to that in a moment. It's primarily exteriors because I find interiors too easy, and there's a focus on something that I call uniqueness. But most importantly, the approach that I have arrived on is very, very low because that's, the 5 to 10 minutes extensive research on the prompt space, generating over 50K images within Midjourney, including that image that you see on the right, which shocked Midjourney themselves a bit. It's something that's called overfitting, where I replicate the image of, a famous image practically down to the highlights in the hair. By the way, this prompt is generated by GPT 3.5. So I'll come back to why that is relevant in a couple of slides down the road. So primary technique is pretty straightforward. I threw away the prompts. The prompt is not that important anymore. By the way, this is very opinionated. Please don't mind, but this is the approach that I use. And it's essentially based on reference images. The reason is I find images are what we as architect and visual designers work with. And by using images, it becomes a lot more of an intuitive process. Obviously, me as a technical person has other tools that I could use, but I'm still constraining myself to that. So that particular image, we will walk through how it's built in basically 2 slides. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking off sorry, just, yeah. So I'm sorry that got in the way. Hello?
Hello?
I've just got this, screen problem.
Yeah. Could you please share the screen, the green button?
No, I've lost control this moment.
Okay.
So Oh, is that better?
I've lost control of my screen. So anyway, I hope you can still see the rest of the screen, so that since we are short on time.
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
I have a chat window in front of me.
Uh,
So
Just one thing about it might be that the maybe switch your video off because it might just be your connection, the bandwidth.
yeah, I've lost control of everything except moving the slides around. So let me, I will stick with that if you don't mind. Yeah.
Okay.
So essentially, I start with any prompt, and in this case, the prompt that you see is one that is picked off somebody's. In fact, it's a description of an image with a red background and so on and so forth. That's basically the base of the prompt. The prompt is really not that important. And then the next step is essentially to basically throw in a reference image. And in this particular case, the reference image is very specifically chosen to be one outside of architecture. But you can immediately see how the visual impact changes, at least in my opinion. And here, this is one important point, is that in my work, I use reference images across all aspects of visual imagery. So there are machines, there are product images, all of that is thrown in order to be enabled you to get a unique image. Yeah. So step number 2 is throw in the first of the reference images. And step number 3 is to essentially throw in all of the other images. So if you see here, the image on the left is what we were looking to build, or which we accept as a fair answer for what we are trying to design. And there are 4 images. The last 2 are, I mean, the second 2 in the image references are basically generated images. The other 2 are from some form of architecture, but you see the black, the masonry, and the wood is something that I wanted to get into the mix. And the AI or Midjourney essentially pulls those images in together to create the final image. Similarly, you can, of course, use images to drive the warmth, for example, of an image. So here we take a cold image, we add other images to make sure that it gets a warmth. That's one way. That's basically, using style references as style references. But the most important, or one of the most important aspects of what I do is what I call chasing this uniqueness. And essentially, if you see the image on the left, it is generated by an image actually of the steel cloud plus a generated image. And I use the steel cloud is actually a great example because in the visual history of architecture, steel cloud is very special. And therefore, what we're trying to do here is to get the AI to look in a space that is a lot more sparse, and hence the image is a little bit more unique. The image on the right with the massing that we see, that's also another example of a type of image that I would actually use as a reference image in order to drive the generation towards a specific direction. But very important is, I mean, you can see that the final image is really not in any way either replicating steel cloud or the other shape at all. And so it's a mix of the prompt plus the unique shapes that actually make the difference. Here is another example of using out of architecture images to create this particular visualization. Now here, I would just like to also highlight one thing in the prompt. Actually, you will notice that there is a reference to the Tate Gallery. And within Midjourney, there are certain phrases like Tate Gallery, which represents a huge space. So you can use that as a kind of a shortcode to basically generating these images. But you can see that it's got very little to do with the Tate Gallery, except that it has a huge space within it. Another example here of using unique images. And what you see here with the reference images that I'm using on the left, top left, top right, and then the two images to begin with, these are examples of what I call as precursors. So to some extent, that's one of the secret sauces in the imaging that I'm doing. It is that I generate a huge set of abstract images, just as the one in the left, which is also generated with Midjourney, which I don't necessarily always publish to Insta. But I use that as reference images to then generate the images like the one on the right. And by the way, here on the right, you find another example of a strong phrase in Midjourney, which is this Hudson Yards, which is basically too strong because you see that Heatherwood thing always in the image. Yeah. So my view is that, essentially what I'm trying to do is to build my own, or what I do is essentially I have built a reference library of all of the images that contribute to the kind of look that I'm trying to do. In my case, it's all over the place, but in your case, you will end up you will want to probably take images of your own work and build that library just the same way as David spoke about, and as in fact, actually, Joshua uses also a very similar technique, I guess, to get that look that both of them are trying to get. So, and the reason why this is important is because in a few months from now, the prompt, as far as I'm concerned, and being able to understand the prompt is not really going to be a critical thing at all. In fact, what the AI is looking for is more of the context of what it is that you like, what is that makes this generation yours. Yeah. Just a quick note, Midjourney mood boards that David spoke about are actually also something that I'm trying. Here you can see a mood board that is built around Ezra Stoller-like images, and you can see the results on top, which are extremely sort of, clean cut with a little bit of curves and modernism. So that's another direction that is worth exploring. Here, once again, that same mood board used with the prompt and the images that I spoke about before. And you can see how, it still moves the image in a very specific direction. So that's more or less it about, how I do my work, but it's essentially I reuse the same prompts for weeks on end, and they appear actually in styles which are very, very broadly divergent, and it's primarily driven by just these images, right? And you don't need a lot of images to be able to do that. At some point of time, let's say in a 4-week period, I use probably about 10 images and switch between them. So where do I think all this is heading? It's my opinion. I think one is, of course, comfy UI and the graph-based, non-destructive. It is not non-destructive, but kind of approach that we used in digital imaging is probably one thing that's very applicable. But what we are doing is already actually visible in this is this is screenshots of a part of the screen of the tool that we are building, which show you where all this is headed. So it starts with you dropping an image into let's say the Copilot or whatever it is, and the rest of the text is coming in from analysis by the agents, which are basically the agent is analyzing the image. It proposes, it breaks out the prompt elements, and as you can see, it's there on the right before finally delivering you the prompt that would basically replicate or not replicate, come close to the image that you have dropped in. And during this whole phase, it will be number one, you can have a conversation with the model, whether it be imaging or let's say your 3D model. And most importantly, and that's the part that you don't see here, is that this is actually a desktop tool that takes your whole context, all of your files, all of your images. So you essentially are informing the model about what it is that you like or how do you do things. It is able to find the way around and basically build the images for you. So the results are what you see here on the screen. On the left, we have the original image. In the middle, you have the one that's generated by Midjourney's Describe. And you can see that there is actually a lot of noise in Midjourney's describe function. It has David Chipperfield, and it has some lens description. I mean, that's sort of, Midjourney mystery. But you see on the right, the prompt that is generated by the agent, and this is in fact a generic agent. It's not even tuned for Midjourney or for architecture. And you can see how close the image is to the one that is on the left. And similarly, our goal is to essentially, split out the process with which you engage with AI models and how you interact with AI models from the models themselves. So this can plug into that same prompt, plug into OpenAI, creates that image that you saw on the left, but there is a reasonable overlap. The OpenAI is nowhere as good as Midjourney. And on the right, you have that, helped with a bit of a reference. So all in all, I mean, just as a summary, if you're starting out, I think that this process with images and is a great way to get started, to go in that right direction, to get an intuition of how AI works for you and how especially Midjourney works for you. Definitely, if you're using it in a professional context of architects, I would strongly recommend using Comfy UI. And of course, we are definitely going towards in a direction where you can conversationally build images, and I'm sure that Midjourney is going to come up with something similar in the near term. So thanks a lot. Let's continue the conversation on Instagram. I'm Raging Bal out there. Thank you. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Bal. That was absolutely fascinating. I wish we'd had you on in years gone by. That was a kind of unique approach. I have to say one thing, I completely disagree with you. And you say I'm not an architect. You are the most architectural person I've seen, I think, on Instagram. You really have a strong sense of carrying with you a certain sensibility. And I think you are an architect.
Yes,
and
but you know what I mean. I'm not an architect. I mean, especially, one of these things that struck me was when David said, we cannot use other images. I realized that as a professional architect, you wouldn't be able to do the thing I do, or at least not reveal to the client. Yeah. So there are a lot of things about architects, and plus the fact that architects want to have the building in, I spoke to a couple of architects very early on when I was doing this kind of thing to build a tool. And the first thing that they asked me was, in fact, I spoke to Gensler, and I have a friend who's very senior there. And she was saying, Bal, but can you put the building in that location? This was three years ago. And, no, at that time it was not possible. But today, of course, it is. Right? Yeah.
No, I guess it depends on your definition of the architect, right? And to my mind, I have a kind of very sort of expansive definition of the architect. I've noticed, I mean, two of the ADs that I worked on, one was on space architecture, and I realized so many people going into the space architecture, working for NASA and so on, had an architectural background. And then there was another one that I worked with Ben Asfarahi on called 3D printed body architecture. It was basically Neri Oxman and other people who were doing dresses for Iris van Herpen. And I think that is absolutely quintessentially architectural, because you're bringing with you a certain set of skills. And actually, we have a lot of marketable skills that we don't really
and curatorial abilities, because in the end, I mean, my view is that we are, the sum total of all of the images that we have seen, and it's mainly images because we haven't experienced many of these buildings, right? Yes, and that's where I think that, I think the difference, I was one of the first generation of CAD architects working with Calatrava. You got a bit of resistance, but the resistance now, and some of the comments that I get is, I mean, all of us probably get it, is oh, this is not architecture and this is, fantasy. And that is because with CAD, utility came first. And the creative aspect with parametric, etc., came afterwards. So people had time to adjust. It came up, by the time the story of, you will get us all fired is over. But with AI, I mean, that's the challenge. I mean, you have here a creative companion. You have something where you must admit, hey, all this time, what I've been doing is stealing images and putting them together. I mean, at least this is my outsider's view of it.
Yeah.
And I think you touched upon that in your lecture on at the AAB, and I noted one comment that you made, or one of the things that you said was, we are not as creative as we think we are, or something to that extent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me open this question up to everyone else. I guess what I found interesting today was the fact that we all come at this from a different approach. I'm a theorist. I approach it from a different sort of way. David's working in an office, and he approached it from a different sort of way. Joshua's working as a tutor, as a professor, and likewise, Mitra is also doing that. And Bal, you're working in a kind of very hybrid way, and I think what's interesting is how they all coalesce, and we get different things out of this platform. And it's one of the questions I think I found interesting was the use of the verb. Do we generate, or do we design, or do we curate? I think that was the word curation kept on creeping in, and to my mind, that is the important way of understanding this kind of collaboration that is at work. In a sense that, I think in the end, one of the things that the reason why I think your work, Bal, is so strong is that you have got an eye. You've got an eye for what architecture is, and I think underlying all these presentations, you ultimately have to be an architect to really be in charge of the visual imagery. It's not someone who doesn't have that background, I suspect, is at a disadvantage. Let me just float that out there.
I mean, my answer to that is yes and no. I mean, I think that at this stage of development of a technology, most people are trying to showcase their skills in, let's say, the Midjourney, the AI tool, as opposed to the architecture. And so their architecture ability. I mean, I think both Joshua and David do not belong to that group of people who are just showcasing their technical skills. And I think that it is a lot about the intent, right? I mean, it is a lot of, my intent is, as I said, I'm playing a role here. I'm an architect. I want to be, designer. I want people to look at that detail. And that's, if I took it from a different direction, which I did very early, where I took 3D and I created LoRa's and stable diffusion, the images were terrible, I couldn't, I was embarrassed to show them. And there's no way architects would buy into that. And, my friends are architects, and they are pretty, snobby architects too. So it is really the attitude. David and Joshua might have similar or different opinions.
David or Joshua, both.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in between for me. I see like these images that you're generating aren't necessarily a true design in a way, but you are putting in so many decisions and so many moves in order to control them that you kind of are. One way that I like to look at it is the emergence of hip hop and sampling. Right? So you're kind of taking and borrowing and stealing and remixing and merging and generating your own art form. And of course, it's on a platform of some other people's works. Again, that's why I like to use my own photography a lot. And any ways that I can kind of imbue the authenticity into what I'm doing, I like to do that. Of course, I don't strictly adhere to that, but or like with Bal said, when you generate maybe your own image and then use that as the image to generate the other images like that. I think those routes are powerful because they put you more in tune with truly designing, but ultimately the true design in any sense, if I'm drawing it by hand or if I'm doing it on a computer, you still have to make the right choice, the right move, the right plan move. This hallway needs to be here or this large. There's a lot of choices and decisions that you make as a designer, as an architect, and that's ultimately what it comes down to, however you create the thing.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, that's always the question. How do we come to creative terms with these new technologies? Maybe perhaps keeping in mind that we're also sort of looking or trying to sort of understand what things are coming down the pike, where things are going. I would say, again, you can clearly, I think, see a shift in sort of things that can be offloaded to a non-biological intelligence of some sort, versus what might be innately human. I think still critical thinking, being able to have the situational awareness to weigh pros and cons, evaluate trade-offs, and then provide direction, is still innately human at this point. And in fact, then we just sort of execute certain things with let's say diffusion models or large language models. So, but it's a really interesting point here to make, I think, is that as these tools, I mean, we're just seeing the sort of first generation of these tools. As they progress, the question becomes, what do we want them to do for us? And I think, again, we need to have maybe a seat at the table, and be able to help drive that conversation, whether it's us getting under the hood and actually helping to develop the tools, or simply because it drives me crazy that we're just sort of consumers of the tools. But I actually find it more interesting when we're misusing the tools or using them differently than I think a software developer might think of, or in fact developing our own. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And then last, I would say again with that sort of consumer model, we get a bunch of models that are sort of one size fits all. So like I'm using the same Midjourney model that everybody else is, sort of at least out of the box. But then I guess the question is, can we see some of these tools becoming decentralized, and becoming much more personally fine-tuned and become assistance agency, that is highly honed in on just your own needs and wants. So.
Well, I think that's
And
what we're
that's
seeing.
what we are trying to do is, especially, context becomes more and more important as time goes along. So a lot of that will change over the coming months we are not probably the only ones working on this kind of multimodal AI desktops. Yeah.
Mitra, do you want to comment?
I think this is a very sharp question, and it can open up a discussion indeed, this design and generation. So I think design could be emphasized on the process and also intention. But for generation, we can think maybe like it can emphasize on the maybe speed and also let's say output. So the things that came into my mind, it was like that, the differentiation between these two, if we can call us designer or generator, it could be like that as far as I know.
Maybe I can just pick up on one thing, because David is someone here who labels himself a photographer. We all are in some senses, but is that I've often used that sort of model thinking about how we've shifted, in the sense that in the old days, the photographer would set up the ideal shot, and it'd be all towards that, and you wouldn't even find out what it was unless you used a kind of a Kodak camera to quickly do a quick shot. What was the word for it? Anyway, but we wouldn't find out till later. Now we kind of take these sample shots, right? A range of sample shots, pick out one, and carefully filter it, curate it, and so on. And that seems to me the shift that we're getting into in terms of Midjourney. It's become increasingly the curatorial thing, where what is important is not the genius creator so much as the capacity to recognize what is good, in a seed, and then maybe take it further. At least that's the way I see it, as somebody who is a theorist who came back into the world of design through this platform, and found that I could not only, as a theorist, use words, but also with a kind of architectural background, a sensibility, be able to curate and breed the optimal images. Does that ring true with anyone?
Yeah, for sure.
We have been doing that all the time. Sorry, David, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a correlation to hand drawing and sketching, where you used to really develop a really nice sketch, it might take you an hour or two, and now I can make 100, and the real challenge is which one's good. So you could sort of say the same with CAD and Revit as architecture advanced. Your drawing sets used to be maybe 20 sheets when you were on Mylar, and now our sets are multiple hundred pages. And you're just using this tool to kind of create a larger output, but still all those decisions and those other factors kind of come into play. You just now have more options and more control essentially. So, you could even say like if you're doing like a Revit, you might have 7 design options. You can quickly model them in Revit and have all these different iterations. Whereas if you were to do that by hand, again, it would take forever. So I just see it as another quantum leap forward from Revit to something else. It's now this other thing. But it's really still a tool. It's still human driven, and it's still kind of driven in the same way.
Yeah, maybe I would just say with an increase in speed and becoming much more prolific in generating things, comes the responsibility to bring the critical eye and taste and everything else, right? It's so yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, I feel like again, it still requires a human touch. I think that's where it happens then is sort of evaluating and sifting, sorting and becoming again curation, I think is the perfect word for it.
And I think the other thing that I've really picked up on this year, and it's interesting tracking it from year to year, but the personalization has really become a very strong factor. I mean, Bal really sets that out clearly in arguing for an image-based approach towards things, which is quite shocking and surprising, but interesting as well. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of comment on that.
Yeah, no, that's another interesting point. Maybe I come at it from a different direction because I think it sort of depends on who you are and what you're trying to do. But sometimes I don't. I really try to turn the preferences off and sort of get something that I wouldn't want or that I wouldn't necessarily think of. So in a sense, sometimes I don't necessarily want a collaborator that thinks exactly like I do. But that might give me more options, crank up that chaos and maybe subvert maybe what I was thinking originally. And so I think there's also a sort of, again, I think it depends, but I think in some cases where you're brainstorming or, again, where that part of the process where divergent thinking is most valuable, this can actually be a valuable tool to broaden the design space considerably from just the human brain, sort of a tickler of your imagination, if you will.
I see it as widening the lens of what Midjourney and AI generators can do. I see when you use any of the basic models with no preferences, no personalization, no image references, and you just type in, modern house, you will get extremely terrible outputs. It will be it will only either be fully centered and elevational or 45 with, it gives you very limited compositions and styles. And so for me, it's like the beam that used to be this narrow has now widened because I got this, I have this, I have this, and then I blend them all together and do all these different iterations. And that's really what's allowed me to more quickly get to what I want instead of hitting my head into like how complex I have to develop the words just to get something kind of like what I want. But I think it's also, to Joshua's point, the unexpected is fun. So I just experiment. I mean, oftentimes on these things, I'm not just aiming for an exact one image. I'm just sort of venturing out and seeing and exploring. And I will mix 7 personalization styles together just to see what it does. It might be terrible, but maybe something cool comes out of it. And then I have another idea that, launches off of that one thing too. So.
Maybe, Bal, I could ask you, just as because of your particular expertise, what is it about Midjourney exactly? I mean, we all seem to favor Midjourney, but what do you think that it has that other platforms don't have?
Oh, definitely. It is starting out. There are two things. I mean, obviously, the stylization is definitely something that's special to them. But I mean, I've done a lot of research on Midjourney images. I mean, at least what is being created. But I think it is the quality of the input is definitely very, very high. So whereas the others are trolling, I'm sure that there is a filter gate for images on which it is trained, as opposed to just trolling all of the images. And this picture that I was showing, I mean, it's surprising. I mean, actually, when you see it in real life, you see, I mean, this Margaret Mead, the image is, it shouldn't be in Midjourney to a certain extent. You shouldn't be able to replicate that image, right? In V7, the same thing exists. You can take that prompt, put it in V7, you will get exactly the same result. And unless they release the details of what they're doing, it's very difficult. But I would say that it has to do with the source images as opposed to, there is a filter gate. And you also see that, tagging is another important thing. I mean, we forget that, when you're training images, you need to have proper tagging or also in documents. If you haven't tagged it properly, and if those quality controls are missing, then your model also will be a poor quality. I mean, of course, nowadays, retraining and recursive training does help improve the quality, but nonetheless, definitely data quality is my, view, what makes Midjourney different. And I wouldn't use any other tool because for the moment, in fact, we offer commercial versions of Flux to our users, and we've always tried to get close to the quality. And without LoRa's, you just cannot get anywhere close to what Midjourney is doing. There is another imaging tool which is very close, but it also comes from the West Coast. It starts with P, and I forget what it is. Maybe Joshua knows, Pixel something. And that's the only model that's even comparable. Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank there. Yeah.
I don't know whether we've got any questions on YouTube. I would just simply say that I would label this as beginners. I think we've got some real expertise on show today and some fascinating contributions that actually have pushed things to a different level. Far from being beginners, I think it's been quite I mean, there's so much on today's session. I think I want to go back and listen to it several times. So. Vita, do we have any questions at all on YouTube? Have you seen it there? If not,
yeah, there is.
Yes. What is it?
I found one of them. He or she. Let me find it out. For those who are teachers, Jean Mark Emmy asked, for those who are teachers, how do you integrate these tools into your pedagogy?
Maybe, well, Joshua, you've probably got the most experience here of integrating these tools into pedagogy.
Sure. So in undergraduate design studio, we use them. I actually have to introduce them mostly to a lot of the students. And in fact, I think it's interesting because it gives them a chance to sort of go back and forth and iterate both the words, right? In other words, their concepts, their desires, their wishes, the goals of the project, along with sort of seeing a curated sample of the machine trying to understand those words and translate it into imagery. Then again, we talk a lot about how these tools aren't mutually exclusive in the design process. They actually are really nice ways of connecting to some of the more traditional workflows that they use. So as was demonstrated throughout the morning, you can take lots of photographs of sketches, of drawings, of screenshots of virtual models, photographs of physical models and prototypes, and then begin to feed them in and get different readings of them, render them at different scales, different settings, different times of day, with different materials, etc., as well as just letting AI riff again and sort of think about perhaps things that you might not have been thinking about as a student in a design process. Beyond that, sometimes I do an elective class where we sort of ask maybe a larger question like, where is this going? How is this going to change the nature of our profession? Or what kinds of things can we generate with these tools that are maybe different than some of the other tools that we've used? And that's really interesting. I had students sort of misuse these tools, asking ChatGPT to write G code for 3D printing. And it was actually able to in some strange ways. You start to get these weird objects that are not traditional, where you sort of make a virtual model and then slice it, but you sort of describe it in natural language and then see if the LLM can reference G code from elsewhere and sort of put something together. So we do a lot of interesting things, but to me, I think if I think about, let's say, football, right? You don't run to where the football is, you run to where the football's going. And I think as educators, that's what we have to sort of keep our eyes on, is where is this going? And how do we prepare professionals who are going to be leaders in the profession, not today or not tomorrow, but 5 or 10 years from now? And what kinds of things do we really stress and to make sure that they're prepared?
That is, I mean, okay, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but I think that is exactly the question we need to address, because the tools will change, right? And it's almost like an openness and an inventiveness towards continually using these tools. I think Carlos Bagnon is a good example of somebody who's always ahead of the game, or at least ahead of everyone else, and is shifting and changing. And what the tool might change from one week to another because they're continually changing. I would simply say that the question, I won't go into this now, but the question always also refers to written assignments. I mean, I teach theory. I don't ask my students, at least my master students that I teach, to write essays anymore, because they could just go to ChatGPT and get it to write an essay better than anyone else, kind of thing. So I actually ask them to use these tools to make videos that explore a particular topic in a kind of visual way. And it is quite astonishing what they came up with. I will talk about this tomorrow, but I think it's a real challenge towards education. In particular, I think the real crisis is education, not practice, because practice will have to develop for it. But in education, first of all, we have this problem of kind of dinosaurs who were very slow to adapt to things. I mean, I went and studied at Cambridge, and we had a professor who told us not to use the computer in the design studio. And of course, the smart students did, but just did hand-drawn overlays. But it's not just that kind of question, but also we have to think even further into the future than the profession itself. And I think it's a real crisis. I'm doing a book on this actually with Joseph Choma and Areti Markopoulou. And suffice it to say, I think there's a wonderful quote that Joseph came up with. He said, it's not just a question of adding AI and then stirring. It's not that question at all. The whole thing gets reconfigured by the introduction of these generative tools into not just the design studio, but also the theory class. It becomes super challenging. And there's a whole debate there, which I won't go into, but I'll just mention that.
One other thing I'd add is that you really have to stress lifelong learning. I mean, they need to be engaged and open-minded. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No problem. In addition to generative of concept, I think For example, Midjourney can help the students for early stage until the last stage for concept generation. Also, they can think it can improve critical thinking for the students. For example, they can consider that by changing a word, their design can be changed. So they can also critique the prompts. Also, they may understand that there is a relation between the words and generation of their design. So maybe it can also improve their critical thinking of their students.
I think it does both. I think like everything, there's a plus and a minus. There's, a negative, but a silver lining. I would say that with some of these tools, you will lose other skills. Even for instance, writing an essay, I think that skill will eventually disappear. We won't have to. So, but it's also opening up a whole host of other things, and you're gonna, like Mitra's saying, you're gonna have to rewire your brain in new ways and develop new, critical thinking paths along the way. So, yeah, it's really hard, I think, to see where it's fully gonna go. But ultimately, yeah, that's what I think.
Can I just throw something out there? Since you're there, David, and you described yourself as you use the tool as a kind of form of sketching pad. I went to a conference in Kitzbühel in Austria, and there was a guy who'd done a PhD in ETH on yacht design, and he was talking about what they do in yacht design now, and they said we do not sketch anymore. Everything is generated from the data, and that I think rang true with me. And in some senses, you acknowledge, David, you're not the best sketcher, so you use this tool. Do you think that sketching itself might begin to be phased out?
Yeah, it already has. I mean, most students coming out of school aren't well versed in actually sketching anymore. I mean, my generation was one of the last generations that actually learned how to draft by hand. So, I do have those skills, but I wouldn't say anybody else actually knows. And you see that in terms of the drawing sets that you get nowadays. Revit's not very good at creating, line weights and true annotation style. Like it's a little clunky. Most offices develop their own and edit their own. But even in that sense, when you actually look at a drawing set that somebody junior is producing, their line weights are probably off. They're not really sure what that's supposed to look like because they didn't have to actually stare at that with the right pen, with the right size, and use a slide rule and make that decision that was really careful because if it's pen and you can't erase it, right? So everything kind of changes in that sense. And I think there's going to be a relearning of some of those things with today's lens.
I mean, maybe I should just make one final comment. We should maybe try and wrap it up. But I think skills do atrophy. I mean, I learned to drive in the UK, right, and on a manual car. Last time I went to Heathrow and rented a car. I couldn't drive a manual car. I literally, things move, change, and we develop new skills and we lose the old skills. And I think there's something new that is emerging. Douglas Rushkoff talks about this in Children of Chaos, and he says that kind of Prince Charles, or King Charles as he is now, would criticize this young generation for being a kind of Beavis and Butter generation who can't spell, can't add up, can't do this. But frankly, we don't need to spell anymore because we've got spell check. We don't need to add up anymore. We've got calculators. And increasingly with AI, we are developing other forms of expression. And I think there's something emerging which is a different kind of architect coming out of these things, and it's in process right now.
But I would argue that that has always been the case, and the good people, the good architects, the good designers, have always been able to sketch. They've always been able to, I mean, maybe they haven't developed that skill, like, you know, what David is saying, but they have at least been good photographers but, you know, so if they need to sketch, they would sketch. I mean, so I don't think that we need to worry too much about skills atrophying, because, you know, I'm of the opinion, even though I haven't taught, that I would teach, for example, CAD and specifically rendering at very early stages of you know, an architect's career or student years, simply because it makes you engage with you know, lighting, texture, and space, and all of that, and of course form and dynamics very, very quickly. And CAD was one of the, I mean, rendering in fact, not CAD, is one of those mechanisms where I think that it heightens your decision making in terms. Now, with images, we may also say that, you know, I mean, this is where I find that, you know, prompting is great, but prompting is like giving instructions, which, yes, it's great, but there is, you know, it is not an art. It's a science, right? The way I see it. But curating images and throwing images in, putting them together, that's again something that's visual, that needs to be trained before you get a good picture. So yes, I think skills would change, but nonetheless, some of these mediums do make you think about, is this a warm color? Is the light coming from the right direction? And the problem with Midjourney, of course, is the light is not right. But with rendering, you could get it, you know, technically correct daylight in a specific room at a specific time. So sorry about it.
I also think sketching will come back in a sense. You see tools like Krita where you're sketching to generation. So you could actually be live sketching a building and having it essentially live render an image next to you. So instead of, it kind of hybridizes the old school sketch with these new tools. And, you know, they're getting better. They're still clunky. So I think give it another year or two and we'll probably see a lot more of that crossover. And it might even pull some of those old tools back into the fold and bring them more to the forefront. I'm not really sure.
I think we should maybe wrap up now. We've had 2.5 hours of very intense discussion. I want to just leave you with a thought, and that is that, you know, I think what we've seen with Midjourney is that it's beginning to develop what is called these emergent capabilities. And I don't know if you've noticed this yourself, but just a few weeks ago, I'd had an image and then I animated it on Midjourney, and it was someone climbing some steps. And that person or that figure, whatever, was able to put their foot on the right step at the right time. That never happened before. And that is something that's coming out of searching the data and really in a rigorous way, working out what really looks like. But this is something that they call emergent capabilities. That is skills that were not specifically trained, but it kind of gathers those things. We saw how ChatGPT learned to write code, learned to translate languages and so on. And this is, I think, something truly astonishing that's beginning to emerge out of the tool itself. So I think it's a learning journey, and I want to just finish off by thanking. This has been one of the greatest sessions I think we've had in terms of insightfulness. It's not a beginner session at all, but it's extremely useful for everyone, even including the experts, in terms of engaging with these tools. So. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, David. Thank you, Bal. Thank you, Mitra. Thank you for this contribution. This is going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel. It'll be out of date in about 6 months' time, but nonetheless, I think it'll be. It's an incredible contribution. More and more people are having to learn these tools, and this has been an incredibly good session in terms of guiding everybody, both beginners and the more advanced people, towards the better use of these tools. So thank you. Just to mention briefly that tomorrow there's going to be, I'm going to do a talk more generalized about the whole theoretical framework of AI to go alongside this more practical use of these tools. And there's also going to be a Sunday series that's going to go through We have Stephen Wolfram coming, and so on and so on and so on. Some really significant figures that are contributing towards digital futures. So it's great to see all these things happening all at once. So thank you so much. What a fantastic session. To be continued, to be continued. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Neil. Anytime.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.